A woman suddenly vanished shortly after returning home from a brief trip. When her family came to check on her, they found the house in disarray. Strangely, her only son, who was the only person present at the scene, kept changing his story. Could her disappearance, right inside her own home, have something to do with him? What made the situation even more peculiar was the location. El Paso, a city in far west Texas, right on the border with Mexico. Known for its vibrant cultural blend, tense border atmosphere, and high crime rate, El Paso is a place where many families, despite hardship, have remained rooted across generations. They hold tightly to tradition, loyalty, and weekend gatherings rich in community spirit. It was in this very environment that Gloria Marmolejo was born on July 28, 1954. She grew up in a large Mexican-American family where members deeply cared for and supported one another. Daily life revolved around close-knit interactions, shared meals, and constant conversations. As a young woman, Gloria met Bene Marmolejo, a man who swept her off her feet from the very first meeting. After several years of dating, the two married on October 11, 1975. Gloria entered the marriage with full devotion and unwavering trust. She always stood by her husband, never letting anyone speak ill of him, no matter the situation. Their married life soon entered a new chapter with the arrival of their children. Manny came first, and a few years later, David was born, filling the house with even more laughter and joy. The presence of the two boys brought fresh energy to the family, and during those years, their life felt almost perfect. However, things began to shift after David's birth. Bene took on a new job, which he claimed required frequent travel. At first, he was gone for just a few days at a time, but his absences gradually became longer and more frequent until eventually he was practically gone. No one knew where he went or what he was doing. His trips were wrapped in silence, and even close family received no explanations. These prolonged absences began to leave a visible mark by the time David was around 6 years old. Bene had virtually disappeared. Within a few months, his absence became the norm, and no one expected him to return. When nothing changed, Gloria officially filed for divorce in April 1995. Ben left the state and completely cut off contact with both Manny and David. Confronting this new reality, Gloria refused to let Ben's departure break her spirit. Rather than dwell on the pain, she embraced the circumstances and dedicated herself to raising her two sons. According to her brother, she made every effort to build an individual bond with each child, adapting to their unique personalities and needs. Over time, the distance between Manny and David became increasingly noticeable. The two brothers gradually pursued very different lifestyles and no longer had much in common. Manny settled down early, he landed a dream job, and maintained a steady, structured life. David, on the other hand, was constantly changing, his interests, his ambitions, even his entire direction in life. Nothing seemed to stick for long. Amid all these changes, Gloria began to face the reality of living alone after years of devoting herself entirely to her family. But rather than let loneliness take over, she chose to change her life. At the age of 50, she retired after 27 years of service and returned to school to finally complete the management degree she had once put on hold. That turning point led her to a new career in real estate, where she became a licensed agent buying and selling properties. The job not only brought in income, but also gave her a renewed sense of purpose. It offered her flexible hours and the ability to control her own schedule, something she had never truly experienced before. Thanks to this new chapter, Gloria's life gradually found stability. Her home was always tidy and well kept, surrounded by a lush, vibrant garden she personally nurtured and adored. Each day passed peacefully, filled with reading, fresh air, and the quiet serenity she had spent years trying to find. But then, without warning, that peace began to crack. One of Gloria's longtime neighbors, an elderly man she had known for years, fell seriously ill. His adult son, who had never appeared in any legal or neighborhood records, returned to care for his father. From that point on, Gloria started noticing strange things happening. She often saw someone watching her from behind the thick bushes along the fence that separated their yards. The man would hide, never coming too close, but his stare made her feel deeply uneasy. Not long after those sightings began, Gloria noticed him holding what looked like a phone or camera, its lens pointed directly at her. Even more troubling, this wasn't a one-time event. It happened repeatedly. And from that moment on, Gloria's sense of safety inside her own home began to unravel. As the unsettling signs grew more frequent, she tried to remain calm, though her anxiety steadily increased. Still, Gloria never called the police. Part of it came from compassion. She didn't want to cause more stress for her ailing neighbor. She feared that involving law enforcement might only escalate the situation. Another part of her believed the best course of action was to stay quiet, stay alert, and avoid doing anything rash. Unsure of how best to proceed, she chose to call her brother Mark instead of the authorities. In a composed voice, Gloria recounted everything that had happened, admitted how worried she truly was, and asked him to check in on her regularly, just in case things took a turn for the worse. Though she didn't want to make a big deal out of it, she still believed her family deserved to be informed. After that phone call, the idea of moving away started to take clearer shape in Gloria's mind, especially since both of her sons had long since established lives elsewhere. Manny was living in Phoenix, while David remained relatively close by. The city of El Paso, which had once given her a daily sense of peace, now felt increasingly unsettling. To understand how things got to this point, you'd have to rewind to when David, the youngest of Gloria's two sons, began entering adulthood. That was the point when he slowly became the center of everything that unfolded afterward. Even as a child, David had stood out, not because he was exceptionally bright or well-behaved, but because he was headstrong and constantly defiant. He frequently ignored important routines, neglected schoolwork, dodged household chores, and argued with adults whenever they tried to guide him. This behavior became even more apparent when compared to his older brother Manny, a calm, athletic, and ambitious young man. While Manny followed rules and stayed focused, David chose a more reckless path. He disregarded school discipline, spent more time chasing girls than studying, and developed a pattern of doing things only when they suited his mood. One week he'd be obsessed with learning to play an instrument, and a few weeks later he'd abandon it altogether. Even when Gloria asked for help around the house, he'd find excuses to stop midway. Rather than investing in his education or thinking seriously about his future, David focused on his looks and finding ways to impress his classmates. What truly mattered to him was appearance, popularity, and being admired by girls. Family members recalled that even in middle school, he craved being the center of attention. He knew how to use his good looks, confidence, and natural charm to draw people in. That's why, while his peers were still figuring out the basics of dating, David acted like he had it all mastered. He saw himself as someone who naturally stood out, and he believed it was only right that girls would pay attention to him. This sense of self-importance gradually became a deeply ingrained part of his personality. So when David started dating Laura Marmolejo at age 16, he brought that same attitude into the relationship. To outsiders, Laura seemed like his official girlfriend, but in reality, David was secretly seeing other girls behind her back. Around family and friends, he introduced Laura as the girl he was committed to, yet privately, he continued juggling multiple relationships. What seemed like a typical teenage romance took an unexpected turn when Laura, then a 9th grader and 2 years younger than David, found out she was pregnant. That news forced both of them to face responsibility and rethink their lives. David said he needed to grow up and take care of his family. So he dropped out of school, started working, and soon after proposed to Laura. That decision shocked everyone, Gloria included. Even though she was fully aware of the truth, she chose to stand by David and refused to turn her back on him during such a difficult time. Not only that, she welcomed Laura into the family and took it upon herself to help care for the baby. The more involved Gloria became in the lives of her children and grandchildren, the more indispensable she became to the household. After the couple's first child was born, they went on to have 3 more. Living under the same roof, Gloria handled the daily routines, offered financial support, and stood by them through every stage of the kids' development. It was as if she were reliving her days as a young mother, only this time as a grandmother, pouring all her love into nurturing the next generation. But while Gloria brought stability, David continued to struggle with finding direction in life. He bounced from job to job, working in all kinds of fields but never sticking around for long. Each time he started something new, he would quit soon after and rarely showed any drive to move forward in his career. Then, an unexpected opportunity came his way. He was offered a position at a construction company in Phoenix, Arizona, with better pay and the chance to reconnect with his brother Manny, who had been living there for years. Not long after, their father Benny also got back in touch after being absent for many years, and he too was now living in Phoenix. Seeing a stable job and family nearby, David decided to move there with his wife and kids. Relocating to Phoenix wasn't just a change of address. For David, it was a chance to earn more money, mend his relationship with Manny after years of silence, and reunite with Ben, the father he hadn't seen in years and once thought he'd never reconnect with. However, life in Arizona didn't turn out quite the way David had imagined. Ben was now living with a woman and raising two younger children, Jonathan and Mariah Wilson. At the time, Mariah was only 11 years old, making her 17 years younger than David. Despite the large age gap, Mariah quickly bonded with her new older siblings, especially David. To her, he seemed mature and confident, a role model she looked up to. She often visited their home, played with the boys, and helped out around the house. With Laura busy taking care of 4 kids, she appreciated the extra hands. As time went on, the closeness between Mariah and David became more apparent. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but during this period, subtle signs began to raise concern. Mariah started showing up more and more in David's daily life. Soon, Mariah, David's half-sister through their father, became a nearly constant presence in his world. To those around them, there was nothing particularly suspicious about it. Their bond was reflected in shared outings, family gatherings, and moments that seemed intimate and familiar, yet didn't raise any red flags. As Mariah gradually entered adulthood, the closeness between her and David began to make Laura feel uneasy. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but deep inside, she grew increasingly suspicious. From the way they talked to each other to the subtle touches they exchanged, it all appeared to cross the line of an ordinary sibling relationship. While she couldn't be sure of anything, Laura couldn't shake off the growing sense of doubt building inside her day by day. Despite her unease, Laura tried to remain rational. At that time, Mariah had just reached adulthood, and Laura wondered if her worries were simply the result of work-related stress and accumulated exhaustion. While she was still weighing everything, David unexpectedly received a job offer in Hawaii and without hesitation decided to go alone. There, he met a woman named Adrian. Their relationship developed quickly, and not long after, Adrian told him she was pregnant. As soon as the news reached the family, Gloria was devastated. David hadn't even officially ended things with Laura, yet he had already rushed to start a new life with another woman. Gloria still believed her son would come back to reunite with Laura and raise the kids together. But her advice and pleas fell on deaf ears. Disappointed by David's attitude, Gloria turned to other relatives for support. Most of them began to distance themselves, except Mariah, whose actions stood out. She continued to stay in touch with David regularly, despite the long distance. Their bond didn't fade. In fact, it only grew stronger over time. Because of that closeness, no one thought it was strange when David invited Mariah to spend the summer in Hawaii when she was 15. Everyone assumed it was just a typical family visit after all. She would be staying with her older brother, the woman he was living with, and their newborn baby. But within just a few weeks, things began to feel off. Adrian gradually picked up on subtle signs, things that would seem innocent to others. The way they looked at each other, the way they whispered, or their playful moments together. At first, it was only a fleeting unease, but soon a distinct suspicion began to take shape. That suspicion was finally confirmed one afternoon when Adrian walked in on them in the bedroom. Stunned and horrified, she immediately called Gloria to tell her everything. Upon hearing the news, Gloria nearly collapsed. She couldn't believe that her own son could be involved in an inappropriate relationship with his underage stepdaughter. In a state of shock, she could only say one thing, that whatever was going on had to stop immediately. Less than 24 hours later, Mariah was sent back home to Texas. Fortunately, the incident was never reported to authorities, so no legal consequences followed. But from that moment on, Gloria no longer saw David as a son she could ever trust again. Things grew even more tense when Adrian decided to tell Gloria the entire truth. What followed was a serious confrontation between mother and son. Gloria didn't sugarcoat it. She immediately condemned David's actions, demanded he cut off all contact with his half-sister Mariah, and made it clear she would not tolerate anything like this ever again. But instead of showing remorse, David pushed back. He insisted that nothing inappropriate had happened with Mariah and accused Adrian of overreacting. Gloria didn't believe him. With her experience and clarity of judgment, she could sense that David was hiding something. What she had seen and what she'd been told made her believe the situation was far more serious than he let on. Just as the family was still reeling from that confrontation, another devastating event hit them. Only a few days after Mariah returned to Texas, David was involved in a serious motorcycle accident on a winding mountain road. He lost control, was thrown from the bike, and sustained severe injuries. The crash left him so badly hurt that doctors had no choice but to amputate one of his legs. The moment Gloria received the news, she didn't hesitate. Despite the rift between them, she immediately flew to Hawaii. The only thing on her mind was that her son was lying in a hospital bed, alone, in pain, and vulnerable. When she arrived and saw David lying motionless, covered in bandages and surrounded by medical equipment, she rushed to embrace him, almost as if all the anger and heartbreak had vanished in an instant. That emotional reunion, born in the middle of tragedy, marked a turning point in their relationship. Throughout David's recovery, Gloria stayed by his side, helping him adjust to his new physical limitations, from learning to move again, to eating, to daily rehab sessions in the hospital. Later on, David would often talk about that period with emotion he couldn't quite hide. In conversations with others, he'd say that his mother held his hand every day, encouraged him constantly, and did whatever it took to remind him that he was still himself, even if his body wasn't whole anymore. As his health began to stabilize, Gloria made a proposal that caught David off guard. She wanted him to come back home to El Paso with her. He agreed almost immediately. There was nothing left for him in Hawaii. His relationship with Adrian had ended, and his children had long stopped calling or checking in. At that point, returning to live with his mother was the only real option he had. Before they packed their bags and left Hawaii, Gloria laid out one firm condition. David had to cut off all communication with Mariah permanently. In exchange, she promised to keep everything quiet and give him a chance to start over. David didn't hesitate. He agreed, and together they returned to Texas. Back in El Paso, Gloria resumed her daily routines and focused on helping her son adjust to his new life. Still, she kept a close eye on him, monitoring every phone call and every move he made, worried that if she let her guard down, everything could spiral out of control again. After they settled into their new home, David seemed calm. He helped around the house and showed no signs of unusual behavior. As for Gloria, who had weathered so many storms in the past, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally in control. Still, not all of Gloria's uneasiness disappeared. The neighbor who used to watch her from behind the bushes still lived next door, and his presence continued to make her uncomfortable. But now that David was back home, she felt somewhat safer. Even if there was still emotional distance between them, just having a man in the house gave her more peace of mind when she was alone. With things at home seemingly under control, Gloria began thinking about taking a short trip. Her oldest son, Manny, who now lived in Phoenix, had been inviting her to visit for months. Now that David's health had stabilized, she finally decided to accept. Before leaving, Gloria gave David clear instructions on how to manage the house and follow her guidelines while she was away. David stayed in El Paso, handling chores and behaving as though he was following every direction she'd given him. Yet, while she was in Arizona, Gloria couldn't shake a strange feeling. She didn't know exactly why, but something felt off. Eventually, she called her brother Mark and asked him to stop by David's house just to make sure everything was okay and that Mariah wasn't there. Mark agreed, but the way he reported back didn't reassure Gloria at all. She had the sense that he had only glanced around the yard from outside, made a quick phone call, and didn't really look into anything. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. Finally, unable to ignore her instincts, Gloria booked the earliest flight back to El Paso, without telling anyone. The moment she walked through the door, she knew something was wrong. The house, which she always kept neat and clean, was now a mess, dirty, cluttered, and disorganized, with items strewn everywhere. What caught her attention most was her own bedroom door. It had been locked shut from the outside, secured with a brand new padlock that looked nothing like any of the locks they had ever used in the house. Her first reaction was to call David immediately and demand an explanation. He told her he was at the movie theater and would be home soon. When he returned, the atmosphere became instantly tense. Gloria was furious. She scolded him for breaking his promise, letting the house fall apart, and ignoring everything she had asked him to do, like none of it mattered. David tried to defend himself, saying he was only in the middle of helping her pack for a return trip to Phoenix. A few hours after that argument, on the evening of July 25th, Manny grew concerned when he couldn't reach his mother. She had left his house that morning, but since then, there had been no calls, no texts, nothing. He tried calling and messaging her repeatedly, but there was no response. Sensing something wasn't right, Manny reached out to David. At first, David didn't answer, but close to midnight, he finally called back and said Gloria had returned home. They had a disagreement, and he had helped her pack. He assumed she had gone back to Phoenix, but by the next morning, July 26th, there was still no word from Gloria. Manny called David again, pressing for more information, but this time David's voice was cold and detached. He simply repeated that he didn't know where their mother was or where she might have gone. His vague, dismissive tone only fueled Manny's growing fear. Something was very, very wrong. The situation grew more alarming by July 27th. Gloria had now been missing for 2 days. Manny reached out to everyone he could think of, family, friends, and neighbors, but no one had seen her. Finally, he decided to call the police. However, officers explained that the missing person report had to be filed by the last person to see Gloria alive, and that person was David. At that point, Gloria's mother and her brother Mark arrived at the house. David answered the door with a calm face, but clearly showed signs of irritation. After repeated explanations and urging, he eventually agreed to go with them to the police station to file the missing person report. In the early hours of July 28th, Gloria's 55th birthday, Manny and his wife decided to travel to El Paso to see her. The moment they walked into the house, something felt off. The curtains were still closed, and the air inside was stuffy and eerily still. What they saw only deepened their concern. Gloria's suitcase was still sitting in the corner, untouched. Her makeup bag hadn't been opened. These small details made it clear she had never left. Her sudden disappearance, without a note or message, directly contradicted David's claim that he had helped her pack. All of her personal belongings were still in place, yet David showed no sign of worry or urgency. As unease continued to mount, Manny began pressing David for a more detailed account of the last time he saw their mother. David showed him a few text messages on his phone in which Gloria had supposedly asked him to unlock the front door for her. Then, out of nowhere, David added a new detail to his story. He said that after leaving the house that night, he went to a party at the home of a woman named Catherine Thompson. Later that same evening, he claimed he went to a nightclub with another woman and stayed out until around 3 a.m. Right after recounting his whereabouts that night, David suddenly made a disturbing comment. While speaking with his brother about their mother's disappearance, he said he was worried the police might find his DNA on her body because he had previously hugged and kissed her. On July 29th, local investigators brought in the entire family for formal questioning. David stuck to the same general story, but this time he changed a few key details. He no longer claimed he'd gone to the movies. Instead, he insisted he had spent the whole evening at Catherine's party. To verify his account, police reached out to Catherine. She confirmed that David had attended the party, but said he only showed up around 7 or 8 p.m. and stayed until close to midnight. According to her, he appeared uncomfortable, checked his phone repeatedly, and didn't engage much in conversation. She made no mention of him leaving to go to a nightclub or being with any other woman that night. At the same time the interrogations were underway, another significant development emerged. Gloria's car was discovered abandoned near an elementary school in El Paso. Inside, her purse, keys, and phone were all intact. However, there was no sign of Gloria herself at the scene. This discovery escalated the case beyond a typical missing person report, forcing police to begin treating it as a potential criminal investigation. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors and collecting witness statements from local residents. Several neighbors recalled seeing Gloria's vehicle leave the garage on the morning of July 26th, the last day she was reportedly seen. One witness, named Julian, was confident she had seen Gloria behind the wheel. However, another neighbor, Rafael Vargas, gave a completely different account. He stated he had seen a young woman with light skin and short blonde hair driving the car. More notably, he also spotted a shadowy figure in the back seat, possibly a man. This was the first clear indication that someone else might have been using Gloria's vehicle after she disappeared. Based on this testimony, police widened the scope of the investigation and conducted a full search of the home. Inside the garage, they discovered several bloodstains, most prominently concentrated around the door of a built-in storage cabinet. It was at that moment the house was officially declared a crime scene. When questioned again, David became increasingly inconsistent, first claiming he left the house in the morning, then saying it was in the afternoon, even adding new details that he hadn't mentioned before. Despite the pressure, he remained strangely calm, never once asking about the investigation or showing concern. Meanwhile, investigators sent the blood samples for forensic testing and began collecting DNA from family members. Watching David closely, Manny started to notice something unusual about Mariah. She was constantly by David's side, quiet, composed, but never leaving him for a moment, which struck Manny as suspicious. He immediately urged the police to look into her potential involvement, especially remembering what Adrian had previously told him. In addition, detectives began analyzing cell phone data and quickly uncovered a series of alarming patterns. Records showed that between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. on July 26th, David's phone made a call. At the time, location data placed him less than 4 miles from the area where Gloria's body would later be discovered. Furthermore, between 5:30 and 6 a.m. that same morning, there was a flurry of calls exchanged between David's and Mariah's phones. Taken together, these findings shifted the trajectory of the investigation. The inconsistencies in witness statements, the forensic evidence, and the digital trail painted a picture vastly different from the one David had originally presented. Gloria's disappearance was no longer being treated as an accident or voluntary departure. It was now considered a criminal case, one that placed focus on the two individuals most closely connected, David and Mariah. On July 31st, the investigation reached a major turning point when a woman walking her dog discovered Gloria's decomposing body in a remote area near the Santa Teresa Desert. The victim's head had been wrapped in 2 layers, an inner layer of plastic tarp and an outer layer of paper bag. Her left leg and one arm were tightly bound with a long rope. The way the body had been handled made it clear to investigators that the killer had deliberately tried to avoid leaving behind any biological evidence. The autopsy results later confirmed the cause of death. Gloria had died from asphyxiation with a fractured larynx, clear evidence that the attacker used significant force and maintained full control over the victim during the act. This reinforced the conclusion that the killing was not impulsive, but a calculated and deliberate act of violence. Further forensic analysis at the crime scene revealed more critical evidence. Blood found in Gloria's garage was confirmed to belong to Mariah, immediately making her a primary focus of the investigation. Meanwhile, Gloria's brother Mark told police that just before her disappearance, Gloria had expressed strong concerns about David and Mariah's inappropriate relationship, and she had completely opposed it. With this information, investigators brought both Mariah and David in for questioning. The two claimed they had been together all night from July 25th into the early morning hours of July 26th. However, cell phone data contradicted their story. At around 1 a.m., David's phone pinged a cell tower less than 4 miles from where Gloria's body was eventually found. Furthermore, between 5:30 and 6 a.m., there were multiple calls exchanged between David and Mariah. Investigators immediately questioned, if they were together the entire time, why were they calling each other? At this point, the mounting pressure began to shake Mariah. When offered a deal, prosecutorial immunity in exchange for full cooperation, she didn't hesitate to accept. Mariah confessed that Gloria had unexpectedly come home and found her there. An argument broke out between Gloria and David, during which Gloria ordered Mariah to leave and never come back. According to Mariah, shortly after the argument, David lost control and physically attacked his mother, killing her on the spot. He later called Mariah back to help cover up what had happened. Together, they cleaned the crime scene, placed Gloria's body into her own car, and drove it out of the city to dispose of it. Mariah also admitted that the blood found in the garage was hers, from a separate physical altercation with David that had occurred days earlier. She told police she was present at the burial site, standing just a short distance away. Her detailed testimony marked a major breakthrough in the investigation. On September 4th, 2009, David was formally arrested. He was charged with multiple offenses, including aggravated assault, concealment of a human corpse, and destruction of evidence. The trial took place in October 2010, during which Mariah, who had been granted immunity, testified against him. On the stand, she revealed that their relationship had started when she was just 14 years old, and David was already 29. But that wasn't the end of the shocking revelations. One of the most disturbing disclosures was that Mariah had a child with David, and that the baby was later given up for adoption. The courtroom was stunned, even among family members who already knew about their relationship. As the trial continued, investigators presented additional evidence. However, they did not find any traces of David's DNA on Gloria's body. The defense seized on this point, arguing that the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence and lacked direct physical proof. Throughout the proceedings, David remained composed, occasionally shedding tears, but firmly denied all allegations. The first trial ended without a unanimous verdict from the jury, leading to a mistrial and a venue change to San Antonio in hopes of ensuring impartiality. At the second trial in 2011, all eyes were once again on David when the court sentenced him to 54 years in prison, the same age Gloria was when she died. But even that wasn't the end of his legal troubles. 6 years later, in 2017, David faced 29 new charges in the state of Arizona, related to a series of assaults, kidnappings, and abuse that occurred between 2005 and 2006. To avoid a life sentence, he reached a plea deal with prosecutors, pleading guilty to 6 charges in exchange for dropping the rest. As a result, David received an additional 25 years behind bars, extending his incarceration significantly. Amid the mounting convictions and the growing list of horrific acts, Gloria's name came to symbolize the tragic unraveling of a family. She had lived with patience, sacrifice, and unconditional love. And yet, heartbreakingly, everything she had protected was destroyed by the very son she trusted the most. Her silent, cold death not only marked the end of her life, but exposed the dark side of a relationship that once seemed unbreakable. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video compelling, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming cases.